Once upon a time, there was a young girl who believed in predictions. She wanted to know what her life would be like, so one day she went to a fortune teller who was said to accurately predict fate. The fortune teller took her hand and entered a trance. In a deep voice, she said, "Over the next 4 years, you will have 3 great successes and 1 major failure." The girl walked home, pondering what successes and failures awaited her in the future. A month later, she met a handsome young man, and they began dating. He fell in love with her at first sight and treated her like a princess. This was the first success predicted by the fortune teller. A year later, the man proposed to her, and she accepted. Her parents were overjoyed, and all their friends and relatives gathered at the wedding. The girl felt like she was finally living the life she had always dreamed of. This was the second success predicted by the fortune teller. The marriage was very happy. Her husband was wealthy, and they could afford anything they wanted. Shortly after the wedding, she discovered she was pregnant. The happy couple eagerly awaited the birth of their child. 9 months later, they welcomed a beautiful and healthy baby girl. This was the third success predicted by the fortune teller. But then the girl began to get nervous. She already had 3 successes, which meant that a failure awaited her. She found that she could no longer enjoy life because she was terrified of the impending disaster. She even began to have trouble sleeping due to constant anxiety. One night, she had a terrible nightmare. In her dream, she saw her baby peacefully sleeping in her crib. Suddenly, a pair of white hands appeared over her. They picked up the baby and brought her to the window. The girl watched in horror as the hands opened the window and threw the baby out. She woke up in a cold sweat and rushed to her daughter's room. The crib was empty and the window was open. Looking out the window, she screamed in horror. Her precious little one lay on the pavement in a pool of blood. The spouses were in despair. Their happy family life was falling apart at the seams. The girl was sure that this was the failure predicted by the fortune teller. But despite the horror she had experienced, the spouses decided that they would be strong and continue to live. They still loved each other very much. One night, the woman had another nightmare. In her dream, she saw her husband sleeping in bed. Suddenly, a pair of white hands appeared over him. In one hand was a knife. The hand struck her husband several times with the knife. The woman could only watch in horror as her husband was cold-bloodedly murdered. She woke up in a cold sweat and with a pounding heart. Turning to her husband, she recoiled in horror. He lay in a pool of blood, and a knife protruded from his chest. The woman was in complete despair. Her happy life was shattered. Her child and husband were dead. But how could this be? After all, the fortune teller predicted only 1 failure, not 2. The next day, she went back to her. "Which one of you is the fortune teller?" she screamed. "You predicted 1 failure for me." "1. Well, it happened. My child died. But you didn't say that I would also have a second failure. My husband also died." The fortune teller sadly looked at the woman and took her hand. "Oh, poor thing," she said. "You don't understand anything. Everything is correct. I predicted 3 successes and 1 failure for you. Your successes were meeting a handsome man, getting married, and having a child. Your failure, however, is that you walk in your sleep." That evening, I lingered late at my friend's place. Going home was far. The nearest metro station to my house had closed 15 minutes ago, and the next closest one, although not the nearest, still had half an hour before closing. So I had to quickly finish the remaining tea and get ready to go, just to avoid walking home at 12:30 in the night. "Hey, before you leave, take out the trash." "I'm too lazy to do it," my friend said. "Come on, man, take it out yourself." "I'll give you $2. "Well, then give me your trash," I said, feeling encouraged. "All right, that's more like it." Descending the dark staircase with a long expired fish in a bag, I hoped not to be late for the station and stumbled almost every 5 or 6 steps. The old guard at the exit shouted something unpleasant after me, but I didn't catch it and dashed out of the entrance. The yellow streetlight hit me with bright light, blinding me. My eyes quickly adjusted to the nocturnal city, and I headed towards the garbage bins, practically opposite the building where my friend lived. With joy in my heart for the easy money, I headed towards the nearest metro station. Luckily for me, it hadn't closed yet. Descending the escalator, I thought about how my wife would scold me at home, and I tried to come up with ways to avoid her verbal wrath. I could lie to her about the annual report at work, but not too long ago, returning from that ordeal, simultaneously happy and tired, I had felt compelled to tell her that I had finished it. I wanted to tell her the truth, but as a rule, wives hate their husbands' friends, and my dear wife was no exception to this rule. Descending into the depths of the subway, I surveyed the station and thought to myself, I wish mornings were like this. There was practically no one around, and although it was somewhat pleasant, it felt awkward and even creepy. I waited for the first train and boarded it with relief. As time passed, the crowd in the train dwindled, and soon, out of all the people filling the carriage, only two remained, me and a skinny man at the other end of the carriage. I felt that if he left soon, the horror would likely come back to me, thanks to horror movies. In the end, we both got off at the same station. When I stepped out of the carriage, the man was already on the escalator, and I, thinking it would be better if at least someone was nearby, decided to pick up the pace behind him. We climbed for a long time, and tired as I was, I couldn't think of any ridiculous excuses to tell my wife. Almost there. A little more and I'll be home. I need to hurry, otherwise I'll really get it, I thought to myself at the subway exit. Taking a deep breath of fresh air, I headed towards my home. My companion was far ahead and turned the corner. I needed to turn in the same direction. He would probably think I was following him. Although I felt like a maniac, at least I felt completely safe. The alley I turned into was always poorly lit, but there was no choice. It was the shortest way to my house. In the middle of the alley, my companion slowed down. Thinking he was scared of being followed and decided to let me go ahead, I quickened my pace. What was strange at that moment, the short alley seemed unnaturally long, and the low buildings nearby seemed unreasonably tall. But I had no doubt that this was the same alley. The red door with a bell, the window adorned with flowers, the huge pile of garbage strewn halfway, the deep crack in the old asphalt, all of this indicated that I had turned correctly. The man ahead started walking very slowly, and I, instead of slowing down, increased my pace. That is, the neighbor was moving slowly, but I was moving quickly, yet we couldn't seem to get any closer to each other. It seemed that with each step I took, the exit from the alley became further away. Fear enveloped me, and I decided to run. But then the man stopped, and I stopped with him. We stood like that for half a minute, and that time also seemed stretched and too long to me. It was eerily silent around us. Then he began to move towards me, and I backed away. Taking a few steps towards me, the man stopped, took out a small folding knife from his pocket, and with a sharp movement of his hand, slit his own throat. A pool of red liquid spread across the old asphalt. I ran up to the man, unable to believe what had happened before my eyes. He looked at me with empty, tortured eyes. Bleeding, he somehow did not die. "Kill me," he whispered barely through the pain. "Please kill me, please." It seemed that he could not die without my help. As if enchanted, I knelt down, took the knife lying near his feet, and made a second incision on his throat. "Thank you, my mysterious companion," whispered and closed his eyes. As if in a dream, I dragged him towards the exit of the alley, hoping that someone would help, but the alley never ended. I had to leave him and go on alone. I walked, not understanding where or why, until the noise of the approaching train pulled me out of my stupor. I stood in the deserted subway station, and the train was approaching. The doors of the carriage opened, and I entered the carriage. At the other end of the carriage, alone, sat a man waiting for his station. The Devil's Cemetery is located near the confluence of the Kova River into the Angara, not far from the village of Ust-Kova in the Kazhemsky district of the Krasnoyarsk Krai. According to legends, the Devil's Cemetery appeared in 1908, immediately after the fall of the Tunguska meteorite, the epicenter of which is 400 km to the north. At first, in this anomalous place, there was observed a hole in the ground, which over time was filled with animal corpses. Legends say that the Tunguska meteorite was a spacecraft of aliens that managed to eject a rescue module before the inevitable catastrophe. Some claimed it was a kind of black box containing information about the aliens, while others believed that the aliens managed to escape but ended up in the Earth's mantle, from where they transmitted signals to the surface. This place gained wide fame in 1983 after it was published in the magazine Technology for Youth. Here is an excerpt from this publication in the 1930s. A group of collective farmers from the village of Rozhkovo was driving a herd from Bratska to Kova, not far from the Angara. During a routine check, they noticed that 2 cows were missing. 2 of the herders, armed with rifles, set out to search for the animals. After some time, the dogs that had run ahead were heard barking anxiously. Moving in that direction, the herders came to a clear round clearing about 100 meters in diameter, completely devoid of vegetation. The dogs, already running onto the black earth, but turned back, their tails tucked. 15 to 20 meters from the last trees, on the bare, as if scorched earth, lay the bodies of the missing animals, and a little further away were several dead birds. The senior herder, an experienced hunter, abruptly stopped. "Stop, you can't go any further. This is the Devil's Cemetery." Step on the bare ground. Death. The clearing indeed inspired horror. On the bare ground, apart from the cows that had wandered, were the carcasses of taiga animals, or simply piles of bones, and the branches of the trees hanging over the clearing were charred, as if from a recent fire. The dogs that had been on the clearing for just a minute stopped eating, became sluggish, and soon died. The hunter said that domestic animals often perish on the clearing during drives. Their bodies are pulled out with hooks on ropes. But the meat of the dead cows is unnaturally crimson, and it cannot be eaten. The locals call this place the Death Clearing, the Devil's Cemetery, and have long planned to fence it off with a strong fence, but somehow they never get around to it, either because their hands don't reach or because people are afraid to stay there for long. Dozens, if not hundreds, of amateur expeditions from different parts of the country ventured into the taiga wilderness, and many enthusiasts paid with their lives for attempting to uncover the mystery of the anomalous zone. According to calculations by researchers of anomalous phenomena in the Far East, over the years of its exploration, about 100 people died, including entire groups, 3 of which disappeared without a trace. The mystery remains unsolved to this day.